use cases of Web3 through DePIN. This episode of the DePIN Hub podcast is brought to you by Nodi, the new Node as a Service product by DePIN Hub. We've seen that 2025 is the opportunities of the node sales. There's a lot of projects with great opportunities, but to run a node is quite complicated. You need to understand Linux, technical terminology, servers, virtual servers, VPNs, VPS, a lot of complexities that you don't want to have to handle. And even if you do, you want to be able to sleep at night knowing that other people are taking care of that for you, right? Leave this work for the nerds. We guarantee that you're going to have the best service possible and all your nodes are going to be generating passive income for you every day without you having to do any work. So go to deepinhub.io/nodes. And that page, you're going to know everything that's happening in our Node as a Service product. And make sure to subscribe to the newsletter because there you're going to know everything that's happening, all the promotions, all the sales, all the great opportunities to make 2025 a great year for us all. Hello everyone, Daniel from DePIN Hub here. And today we're talking to Tom, co-founder of Fluence, a company pioneering cloudless computing through decentralized infrastructure networks that aims to free computing from centralized cloud providers and offering decentralized, low-cost, and verified compute solutions. Tom is also the host of the DePIN podcast and organizer of DePIN Day, one of the biggest DePIN-focused events in the world, I guess. You guys have been building this everywhere. I think it's also a little bit of a different podcast that we're going to try to have today because, Tom is also a great host for a different podcast. Maybe you can just talk about DePIN in general, touching a little bit of Fluence, what he thinks about the space, what I think about the space, and to talk about things that I guess we talk every day anyway, right? What do you think?
Sounds like a plan. I look forward to it. Great.
Yeah, and maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit, your background, and what led you into DePIN.
Sure. Listen, I think you gave a great intro. So thank you. You nailed all of it. And so I think the one thing to mention, I guess, is relevant before Fluence was I helped found Hedera Hashgraph, which is somewhere between the top 15 and top 20 in coin market cap right now, a layer one, basically Solana Ethereum competitor. And so that was my introduction into the space, was joining Manson Lehman when that was a white paper and basically taking it from a white paper to a launch network with a governing council, with funds raised, with a team hired, kind of globally kind of distributed more or less. And so that was an enormous, intensive effort that was a great deal of fun. And I'm still thrilled to see the success of that project, which I think was forgotten by many for a while and has especially since this new administration in the US has catapulted kind of back up into relevance and on people's radar. So excited to see that. And when I left Hedera in 2019, I wasn't looking at DePIN in particular. In fact, the name didn't even exist back then, even though there were a couple of projects, right? And but one of our investors introduced me to the Fluence team and said, these guys are the smartest technical team I've seen. And, I think they could really benefit from kind of a third founder here. And so kind of like Hedera, which had Manson Lehman before, I joined these two guys and as a founder, and we've been building it ever since. And, this was before DePIN was DePIN. And it has been we've been focused on this ever since. And what it is, and I think you described it well, it is a decentralized compute platform, but the difference, I think, for many is it's CPUs, not GPUs, right? So that is not the compute used to train AI, but the compute used for absolutely everything else. And we also, different than others, this is something we can actually talk about regarding what DePIN means, is we don't aggregate compute from consumer hardware. We've started with enterprise grade tier 4 data centers, which are basically the highest tier data centers. And so we think adoption matters most. And people care about the quality of the hardware and the SLAs that you can offer, and that you decrease the complexity of your technical work by a lot if you start with redundant high bandwidth locations that are very resilient to begin with. And so that is a choice we've made deliberately, and that is, I think, that's kind of an interesting thing in the DePIN space, because we think of DePIN as thousands of consumer participants in whatever type it is, right? But doesn't have to be that way, and that is kind of an interesting kind of step that we've done different than others, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions just from like the sentence that you did. First, when did you join Hedera? Which year was that?
That was like, I think early 2017. So it was just a paper at the time.
Yeah, I remember at that time. I was actually the other day looking at some screenshots, and I had like my portfolio at the time was like just some Ethereum and some Bitcoin. Good times. And then then you have, of course, then they had the project with Fluence. So how does Fluence differentiate from other cloud providers, right? Because I remember, for example, when Google started, their main USP was actually they were very good at software. So they managed to have very cheap, bad, and poor hardware working in scale because they have good software to make sure that if something fails, they can like through software fix that. And how does the token or the crypto aspect of Fluence exist? Could it just not be a crypto project?
Well, there you've got a couple different questions. So,
yes, sorry.
So no, great. But let's see. So first, basically, what is our value proposition? And so the value proposition for us is that we are in the order of between 20 and 75% cheaper, depending on how much compute and for how long you have it. And why is that the case? It's the case because a lot of providers have excess compute in data centers for which and plenty of people actually own machines they don't have distribution for. So that we are effectively a distribution mechanism for excess compute. Now, why does the token matter? The token matters because you need to trust that compute. And if you're a consumer and a customer and you want to use compute, you're not dealing with Google and Amazon with a decade of experience and SLAs backed up by years of performance. You're trusting this network and you're trusting people that you don't know, right? And so what you do with Fluence is $12,000 worth of FLT is staked to every 64 core CPU. And so what that means is if that person, if that company effectively doesn't provide the service for which they have been contracted, that A, they can stop earning, B, that stake can be slashed. So that aligns customers with the providers. And that's really important because if you don't have that, you have really tough time competing with the reputation of the large providers. And so we think token economics are kind of the revenue mechanism that, or the alignment mechanism for us. And the other point is you also always want to keep a buffer of excess compute over the compute used. And some early projects just attracted tons of supply and then are still working to fill that supply with demand. We're doing much smaller and just want to keep an excess buffer, but that buffer, we have to make sure it's real and it's available. And so we pay rewards on that buffer and we pay rewards in our token. And if we were just pay those rewards in cash, it would be far more expensive to do that. We'd have to raise a lot more money. So the token economics and the global token market effectively allows us to bootstrap this network to reward providers before their machines are rented. And that is another kind of crypto, I think, component that's super relevant.
No, I completely understood. Like you just had like the light bulb moment to understand how everything works in Fluence. Because usually when you rent a server from like a provider, the provider is managing infrastructure and also selling. They have like a website. You go to Heternet. You go to like so many like Amazon and thousands others. But you guys are collecting in like kind of like a marketplace for other people that have data centers that don't necessarily need to have a website to sell. So they just provided the infrastructure, and you guys are like using all this available idle resource or like service that are not actually being used. And actually, it's good for everyone, right? Like if I want to start like a data center here in Lisbon, Portugal, I don't necessarily need to worry so much about actually being like a customer-facing product or website. So I can just work with Fluence in that sense, right?
That's exactly right. And there's another really important part here, which I should mention, which is kind of why is pricing cheaper? And it's cheaper partly because there's excess compute, but it's also cheaper because it's an open network. And so you sign up as a customer, as a provider for a capacity commitment. It be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, a year, whatever it is, right? Price, fixed, done. Denominated in dollars. But when that's done, if you, the provider, want to raise prices, me, the customer, can look around and can switch to a cheaper provider, someone that didn't raise prices like this, because it's open. And if you're in the cloud, you're locked in, much harder to move. And so because you can move, that means the providers don't have the pricing power to go raise prices, right? Maybe there's a little bit, this provider, so maybe there's a little bit of room, but there's not much. And so that also, you basically have a global marketplace that competes price down to a low level, assuming there's capacity on the network, right? And we think that we'll be able to have a lot of capacity on the network. So I think structurally, when you have this low, almost zero friction to move providers, you eliminate pricing power, or largely eliminate pricing power, which keeps pricing as low as it possibly can be.
And it's very easy to move providers because everything is through the Fluence network.
Yeah, it's through the Fluence network, and it's open. It's open, right? Everything is open source. Everything is open, so everything is movable.
And there's a standard that's easy to work with, because I think that's one thing that AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud they're very good at locking you up hardcore. Especially, I think AWS, they offer so many things. I see that happens with so many companies. Like they raise some money, they don't think twice before jumping on AWS. And then when they realize they're spending $200,000 worth per month on their server bills because they just, it's so easy. We can just use these, and this from AWS, and then you realize you die because you just didn't manage your burn, right?
And it's hard and expensive to leave, and it's a big deal.
Yes, I mean I see a lot. Like for example, with the Helium project. I've been very close with them. Like that's actually how I got started in crypto. No, in DePIN, or decentralized infrastructures. We used to call DY in 2020. But I see one thing that I can realize from their team, like they have enough funding, so they do everything on AWS. There's so many ways that they could reduce the cost for them and for the community, but because they're already so tied up with the AWS, to the point that back in 2020, 2021, I used to run the blockchain for the Helium Foundation, and they moved away from they have their own blockchain. They moved to Solana, and now all the data that you want to interact with the Helium off-chain data, it's through Amazon S3, and you have to pay for the data, right? They could easily move to, for example, Cloudflare that has free egress and is much cheaper for them, but they're just so used to that, probably they don't really do it. And it's a pity for people actually trying to build things on top of Helium, because it's much more expensive for everyone. And then you can clearly see how they're tied.
Yeah, listen, I would take it further. They should move it to a DePIN solution. And that's not, we don't do storage at Fluence, right? But there are other storage providers out there that offer really good services. There's XYO is out there. I spoke to them just a couple of days ago, right? There's a number out there that offer terrific security and far faster retrieval than maybe like a Filecoin does, as an example, though they're progressing as well. So I would, I think eventually, you would think Helium will should be, it's a DePIN project. It should be built on DePIN, right? So hopefully that is something that they can evolve towards.
Yeah, I think that would be hard. Like knowing the team and know how tied they are with the AWS, they probably don't even think twice outside. Because I've been working with StoreJ. StoreJ, it's been I think the first time I run a node, I don't remember. I interviewed John here in the podcast like a while ago, and I've been running a StoreJ node since 2017 or something. And we actually on DePIN Hub we use. To all our backups for the podcast and things that use more data, we use StoreJ, and it's amazing. It's cheap and it's really fast. So it just works. They have an S3 compatible, API or SDK. So it's super easy. But yeah, I mean, I think that's very interesting. And for someone to use Fluence, what is the interface for a developer to deploy something on the platform?
Well, listen. Let me. It's a little. Phrase it differently. So. We are starting off with one particular customer segment, which is third-party node providers. And so we've got a pipeline that's about $5 million worth of third-party node providers that want to basically move some portion of their infrastructure onto Fluence. And so that is the first onboarding process we're in right now. And that's happening kind of as we speak, this week, next week, et cetera. We're starting to onboard those first customers. So in the beginning, there's a lot of hand-holding. We're fixing a little bug here, there. We're, updating the API. So it is coming, but it is not yet set up for general building. It's more set up for particular customers to access the marketplace and then find a provider and use it from there. So it'll ultimately be, and so it is basically it starts off with a marketplace of compute with different durations and pricing, and you kind of select and enter into capacity commitment, and that is kind of where how your compute is determined and apportioned and fulfilled. And then we add services. We continue to add services on top of that as it goes. We'll add, this is a VM, and that's the product we're launching. We're going to add a number of other kind of components later this year, particularly focused on SLAs, and that I think is the key unlock to institutional demand. And so this kind of third-party node provider marketplace use, and the important thing for people to remember is compute sounds like a commodity. It's easy to discuss it as a commodity, but actually, depending on what you're doing with it, there is a number of higher up the stack requirements or develop pieces that need to be built. And so we kind of have to evolve into those. We and no one else is about to replace Amazon. That's not happening anytime in the foreseeable future. But you can be an enormous success with just carving out a couple of markets. And so that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, I guess if you manage to get like 1% of this market, that's already massive.
Well, I mean, here's how I think about it, just in terms of real numbers. The hyperscalers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they have about 600 data centers that average about 50,000 CPUs each. And so if we're able to get to one of those data centers, that would require 600 million FLT staked, right? That's multiples of our FTV right now. So, forget 1%. That's like 15% of 1%. So it is and by the way, that whole market is growing, right? It's growing a lot. So and I think, by the way, that's where you want to be. If you just take a big step back, a big market that's growing and has customers that aren't happy and would like to leave. That, to me, if you could sketch out a market, like, hey, what would be the criteria of a market you want to go after? Well, how about a big one that's growing, that has unhappy customers in it right now? Okay, sign me up.
I feel like when we started at least Hotspotty back in 2020, we never touched Amazon for anything, because I knew like the Helium blockchain at the time was so crazy that we went to all in with like bare metal machines. Of course, I had to spend more time configuring everything, but the cost was a fraction of these things.
By the way, you were very. There's a lot of foresight, because Amazon sucks you in with these data credits, right? And so you get sucked in where it's free in the beginning. It's easy and it's free. And so that is very hard when you're an entrepreneur starting off and every minute matters because you're not doing something else. It is hard to not take that and to do the extra work when there's 1,000 other things you got to be doing, right, to do that. So kudos to you for thinking ahead and doing that.
Yeah, man, no, it was absolutely crazy. Even if I got like, a couple hundred, 1,000 from Amazon, the Helium blockchain at the time was so inefficient that it was growing. I think it was like 300 gigabytes per day on a Postgres database. And I had to, the way that I had to query the data was weird. So I had to have I think each server has 120 gigs of RAM, 64 cores. And I was on 3 replicas on the database, just smashing, because we're getting so much that we had 4,000 or 5,000 concurrent users on Hotspotty when Helium was really picking up. So our entire infrastructure cost was $1,200 a month, comparing to if you had the same thing on Amazon, be 20 easily, right? So we definitely spend I spent a lot of time as the CTO thinking, okay, we're self-funded, bootstrap this company. We don't want to go on Amazon. How can we actually use something like that and how to make it work? To the point, at one point, our mapping infrastructure was the worst. Using Mapbox, I think we're spending like $10,000 a month. And then to the point that we built our own mapping infrastructure that moved from Cloudflare, and then from $10,000 a month, switched to $12 a month. So I feel it's like that's a little bit like the differences of being bootstrap and also really thinking about optimization, cost, and I see a lot of problems with like Web2 and Web3 companies. When they fundraise a lot of money, they just like, okay, let's go crazy. Especially I guess Web3, then the bear market came, they're like their burn rate's crazy, right? Because you're like just like hyping up, and then when the bear market comes, they just like throw the towel because they didn't think that the party was going to stop for a little bit. But yeah, but that's I think that's a little bit about Hotspotty as well. I think I'm happy that I always had this like thought that, okay, I don't really want to go with big companies. I've been using like DigitalOcean for a lot of small projects, and then Hetzernet has been one of our meant to go. But coming back to Fluence, so right now, if you'd have like a specific solution, and then you'd kind of like have like a white glove, flow to onboard that into the Fluence ecosystem now.
Yeah, I mean we're basically opening up the marketplace, but it's a very, let me phrase, like deliberate one by one opening up, because it's not a free for all for everybody just to go join. And that's what it's going to be, and we can't wait for that to happen. But we'd rather have our first customers be happy customers and working. So that's the plan.
One thing that I'd like to talk about is like you also on the last couple of days, I think, released the DePIN token economics paper, right? What brought you to write that paper, and what are your main excitements about what you wrote?
Well, listen, there's a reason why I wrote it, and then there's what it became, and those are different things. And so I think I originally wrote it because we spent a lot of time on the Fluence token economics, and I originally thought, well, gee, we should write a paper about the Fluence token economics. And then I'm like, okay, I've done that. We have some blog posts. I'm like, that's not so interesting. And I'm like, but I've talked to all these founders about their token economics. Maybe I should just write about DePIN token economics because it's much more interesting than just a Fluence thing. So I paid attention, did that, and then it just kept growing because it's like, okay, for example, buy burn. All right, that's interesting, but now I got to explain it. And then I got to explain it, and then I'm like, okay, what other projects have used it? Oh, well, guess what? The exchanges used it, some DeFi I got to explain that a little bit. And then, I shared some friends who were outside of crypto, and they're like, well, hold on. This doesn't make any sense. What about explain this to me? So I need a glossary. And then it basically doubled trying to give context around what the beginning was an incredibly focused, dense thing on token economics. And it's still very token economics focused, but I didn't think we needed another report explaining DePIN. That wasn't the idea. But then I realized that sort of this is where I would totally be in violent agreement with you that paper, if it just was DePIN token economics, it would lose a lot of audience because some people aren't even that familiar with DePIN, and even people that think they are often are not. And so adding so it was DePIN token economics, but then I had to add the context to it and explain a whole bunch of other things, and that even doubled the size of it. And so it became from just focusing on DePIN programs, then I had to figure out, okay, I probably have to give an example what DePIN is, and why are some examples of why DePIN is better, and then how does DePIN compare to centralized models like Airbnb and Uber, and why now, right? So you had to keep kind of backing up, if you will. And so it's supposed to be just about the token economics, and I think it is by far the most detailed one out there that I've seen, but I had to add a lot of context to it. So anyway, it's a lot of reading for people, but I hope it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I really enjoy reading that, especially because there's a lot of things in there that I agree with. But also, I didn't think it's super technical, right? You don't have a lot of times if you read a white paper, there's these math equations, a lot of terminology that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think it was easy enough for people to read. Maybe because I'm around these things all day anyway. But I think maybe after people understand what DePIN is and wanted to get a little bit more into like tokenomics of DePIN, they can just go through this document. I think it's a good intro.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And listen, I agree with you. And I won't name some projects here, but if you cannot explain your token economics without complicated formulas, I think you got a problem. Like it really, you could have formulas behind it, okay, but like it's got, my general view is it should fit on a page and it should be understandable. And if it's not, then why not? And what real value is being added there? Because you're going to lose people. And I think my general thesis here, this is one of the takeaways, is that as DePIN generates revenue, that's going to attract people to this ecosystem. Like, oh, crypto projects are actually generating, or they're actually providing service that people are buying. So this whole investor universe is going to say, oh, now I can look at this and buy it. And they say, okay, it's a token. Now, how does that token work exactly? And like the metrics we've used before from, TPS or TVL or whatever, Telegram follower or whatever, none of that matters. That's not going to cut it. People are going to know revenue, token. Explain that to me. And that has got to be clear. And so that is where I sort of wrote this, to sort of be like, okay, this is where I think this industry is going. And so let's kind of collectively get ready for that. And here's some ways to disaggregate all these different token models to think about ways in which that can be answered.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, touching like the buy and burn mechanism, I think one company that's doing very well, it's JudeNet, right? Like they're very transparent. You can really see like they're growing. Like I think it's a great way for people to see the projects actually getting external resources coming to them that they're selling to Web2, to business, etc. In a way to transfer that revenue into the whole ecosystem of people building it. We're going to be able to stay here talking for hours. We try to keep the podcast around like 30 minutes. One thing that we can talk about is the DePIN Day. The next one's going to be in Token 2049 in Dubai.
Correct.
Right?
On May 1st.
And we at DePIN Hub, we're going to be there. I think you guys are also going to have some sort of booth. Again, we can maybe record something in person, like something short, something really cool.
Let's do it.
I was in the DePIN Day in Hong Kong like a month ago, more or less. And man, it was such a great event. I think it was the best event of the whole conference, to be honest. Also, because
I'm quoting you on that. We're putting that on the website.
Okay. I like it because it was so concentrated. I mean, especially on the DePIN people, like it feels like a high school reunion. And that's something that I really like when the conferences are like that. Because like people that you interact every day online anyway, companies, deployers, etc., developers, and everybody was there in Hong Kong, the other side of the world for a lot of people. So that was very, very exciting. So I'm really looking forward for the DePIN Day in Token 2049. We're going to, be there supporting DePIN and geeking out as much as we can, expanding the network.
This is supposed to be a community effort and a community gathering, and we just happen to be people who stepped up to start it. We're actually hoping that we get some other people to join us to basically cover the overhead of it besides the individual conferences. And so that's something we're working on, because we think ultimately DePIN Day should be a DePIN community run event, not run by and funded by Fluence exclusively, right? Like we're one project, right? Like there should be plenty of others out there who can do this. So, but we have to have the team who's executed incredibly well. Like Nodi has done a terrific job of doing all these events.
And then everyone who are listening to the podcast right now, make sure to go to deepinhub.io, search for Fluence, check the website. They have the links for like all the social media everywhere that you can learn more about what they're trying to build. Make sure to follow them on like social networks, X, anywhere else, LinkedIn. And if you are in Token 2049, make sure to join the DePIN Day. We both are going to be there. We're going to be geeking out about DePIN, things that we do every day anyway. So it's just going to be a lot of fun. And thanks so much for joining the podcast. Finally meeting you virtually, hopefully seeing you in a few weeks in person, and celebrating decentralized infrastructure networks.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for joining, man.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much.